Representing ENTSO-E in this webinar, and I would like to welcome you together with the co-chair Thorsten Knopf from the DSO entity for this webinar on the network code demand response, where we would like to present how this new network code on demand response is going to be drafted, the way we are organizing ourselves, and how we involve you as stakeholders. So let me quickly present you the agenda for today. We'll have a quick introduction from Thorsten and myself, also to explain where we come from, the organizations we represent. We will then deep dive into the drafting process and the working method, meaning that we will discuss the timeline, the roles and interactions between what we call a development team, which is the TSOs and DSOs drafting, the drafting committee, and the public, meaning you. And we will also present first bits of the content, meaning the draft structure of the new network code. Then we will give the words to what we call the 4 subgroups. We have given ourselves an organization, internal organization, and then the 4 subgroup leaders or the co-leads of each subgroup. They will present a focus on their specific topic, which is the general requirements for market access, the pre-qualification requirements and processes, the market design for local services, and last but not least, the TSO-DSO and DSO-DSO coordination, the data exchange requirements, the network development plans, and of course, voltage control. We will then close with the Q&A. I will now hand over the word to Sultan, who will explain all things related to Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Fabio, for the introduction. I will just speak about the logistical part a little bit. So we will have the interactive webinar today. Please see the Q&A section of the Teams chat here. So in the Teams tool, you can click on the Q&A icon, where are the usual icons for raising the hand or reacting. There you will see the Q&A icon. By clicking that, you will be able to submit your questions throughout the webinar that the subgroup leads and the chairs of today's webinar can react on and take them on board for answering if we have time during the workshop. And at the end of the workshop, we will have a Slido where we have some questions towards you, and your input via Slido will be much appreciated, but the Slido part will come at the end of the webinar. So for the moment, while you have the questions during the workshop, please use the Q&A section of the Teams to submit your questions. Thank you.
Okay, and I think with this, we jump into the introduction of the associations. I would hand over the word to Thorsten.
Thank you, Fabio, for the opportunity to give you a brief idea of who you are dealing with. We are developing the text of the upcoming network code or guideline together in a joint endeavor with ENTSO-E and the EU-DSO entity. The EU-DSO entity is not just an association, it's a legally mandated organization that is founded in European law and where it's also defined not only the tasks it has, but also the scope it has. The scope means that it encompasses all the DSOs from the EU member countries. We have, well, not all are in there, but almost all connected customers are in there. So we have more than 900 DSO members, from the largest ones to very, very small ones. As you can see on the right-hand side, we are also addressing a vast number of different questions. It's about TSO-DSO cooperation. I'll just soon tell you something about network code and guidelines, but it's also about demand-side flexibility, where we're, of course, having a particular look today, but it's about everything else. It's about data. It's about the integration of REST. It's about customers. It's about whatever concerns DSOs. So it really is an organization that is encompassing for electricity DSOs all over Europe. Next chart, please. And in particular, we have 3 tasks that are assigned to us. We shall work on implementing legislation on a European level that are mostly network code and guidelines. We did already, together with ENTSO-E, work on the network code cybersecurity more than a year ago, actually. We are now going to give you a brief today on the upcoming network code demand side flexibility, but there will also be reviews of existing network codes. We are closely cooperating with ENTSO-E, that's the second task, and we are doing this on an equal basis. We do have an MOU between the two organizations, and we've agreed that we basically have joint decision-making, joint chairmanship, joint submitting of texts, and so on. So it's an equal level between TSOs and DSOs. And we, of course, also are asked to share best practices, to spread the word. We do this internally for the members of the entity, but we also inform decision makers and the framework that we are operating externally. But today we are on the left-hand side. We are going to brief you on where we are with the upcoming network code. Fabio, please.
Yes, thank you, Thorsten. Also from our side, a very brief introduction. You probably have heard about ENTSO-E. You know ENTSO-E. We are 39 TSOs operating an interconnected grid in Europe, which is one of the largest so far. So 39 members, representing 35 countries and 500 million citizens. To give you an idea, what does it mean? Well, we are operating grids from Portugal to Finland, from Ireland to Greece, and all of them are connected. It's clear that what happens in one part of Europe impacts the other one. Hence, this cooperation is essential, and is why the reason also why we are cooperating further also now with the DSO entity, because of course it's not just TSO and TSO grids which are connected, but also TSO and DSO grids. We are the common voice of the TSOs in Europe. So as you have seen our publications, our work. On the next chart, I can give you some examples of our work so far. I think on European long-term grid planning, for example, you have seen for sure the work on the energy scenarios that we do on the TYNDP, the 10-year network development plan. Being part or being a project candidate in the TYNDP is essential to enter the list of projects of common interest and to apply for funding through the CEF for the Connecting Europe facility. Our security and adequacy analysis, you probably have read about our seasonal outlooks, about our European resources adequacy assessment. On technical rules, market rules, we have done a lot of work already in the past. I would say at least 3 connection codes, namely RFG, the requirements for generators. We've had 3 market codes, most prominent one probably being balancing, 2 operational codes, again, an important one being SOGL, the System Operation Guidelines. On the European platforms in the past, we have started an important process, I think, of standardization. You've seen Terra, Mari, and Picasso, the European balancing platforms, which should facilitate the standardization of how we do balancing and balancing products across Europe. And these are just to name a few. As Thorsten said, the scope of today is to enter, which would be probably one of the new network codes, which is the one on demand response. It was the one that for now was treated always somewhere in all the other codes. But I think that the crisis has shown the importance of demand response. And so we're very happy that we got this mandate from the European Commission to draft this new network code, DSO entity, together with ENTSO-E. I think on the next slide, before we enter into planning details, I wanted to show you, of course, the challenge ahead. You probably, if you have been following this topic, you've seen that ACER drafted framework guidelines on this topic. And these are, of course, the framework guidelines are the basis for how we work. And there's been a public consultation on the framework guideline done by ACER. And you can see the results on the left-hand side without entering into detail, but you can see the diversity of the stakeholder views. Of course, you see green, but you also see red, you see a bit of yellow. And for me, I like to show this chart a lot, internally, externally, because it really shows the challenge ahead when drafting the new network code, but it also underlines the importance of stakeholder involvement through these workshops, through the public consultation, because this is how at least we achieve a common understanding. It will probably be impossible to find let's say, a wording where everybody strongly agrees, but at least we should try and aim for a targeted involvement to gain at least common understanding for things that are essential and things that are probably nice to have and things that actually brings standardization across Europe forward. On the next slide, I would like to present a quick timeline, really an overview about the timeline of how we would like to structure this process. This process is, of course, governed by the regulation, the electricity regulation. So Article 59, you can read through it, talks about a process that should not last longer than 12 months. We received an official mandate from the European Commission, we meaning DSO entity and ENTSO-E, on the 9th of March 2023, which means that 12 months brings us to the 8th of March 2024, where we submit this draft network code to the European Commission. What is the kind of stakeholder involvement interaction that we foresee? Well, of course, let's say we have a body which is officially represented in the electricity regulation, which is a drafting committee. The drafting committee will meet more or less in a monthly rhythm and represents the most important stakeholder associations. We'll have monthly meetings, deep dive into something specific questions. On top of that, of course, we have public interactions. The first one will be this workshop, and then there will be an official public consultation, which will probably last from the end of August to the end of October, more or less, and in between we will have a public workshop. Public consultation means that at this point in time, you will see a first complete draft of the network code. And you will have the opportunity to react on each and every bit of what is written there. And well, the following months will then be used by us, by the DSO development team, and also by the drafting committee to finalize the network code and then arrive to a version 2, which then marks the end for the submission to ACER. Okay, I will now hand over the word to Thorsten, who will explain a bit more in detail how we work together.
Yeah, I've just seen posted in the chat, by the way, after soon after Sultan will give you a brief idea of what the chat is for, what the Q&A are for, and what a poll tool is for. I just posted in the chat that we have more than 300 participants. We are now at 300 something, 305. There's a lot of interest. That is extremely encouraging for us, and we do our best to involve the stakeholders in this process. As Fabio has just shown with the timeline, we do have 12 months to develop a text and to submit it to ACER and then finally to the Commission. During these 12 months, which are until the 9th of March next year, we plan to communicate as good as we can, timely and in a transparent way, what we discuss and the major decisions we make. I think it's essential that this is not a black box, what we are doing, but that at least from time to time, everybody, and maybe in a shorter rhythm, the most important stakeholders get an idea of what is going on, which directions we are taking, and then also being able to comment on it. We basically have 3 pillars of where we would like to involve stakeholders, of course, in different ways. There is the drafting committee that you can find in Article 59, paragraph 10 of the electricity regulation, and the drafting committee where we model the way of working on the expert group that ACER had, and that was really a model of involvement of stakeholders for the framework guideline. Consists of the major associations or the associations of the major stakeholders. We have about 9 or 10 different associations in there. There's ACER in there. The Commission is going to be there as a guest. So we have and we'll have in-depth discussions in the drafting committee. However, that's not all. We also have a public consultation planned. We'll have a first draft of the text, as Fabio said, available by summer, and then have a 2-month public consultation where we're looking forward to the contributions from many of you. And we also, whenever this is a good point in time, we'll hold stakeholder workshops like the one today in order to provide a possibility for a broader group of stakeholders to inform on what's going on. This is not just about these formalities, what do we do with him, but it's about substance. And the substance of it is that we would like to make sure that in the end, after these 12 months, in the development process, of course, the system operators are asked to do the development, but in the end, that we are not presenting a system operator only idea of what the text should be. If we would do that, then we wouldn't have done our job. We need to present something that is acceptable to all, well, more or less acceptable probably, to all major stakeholders. And that somehow presents a good idea of how we can go forward together to mobilize the potential of distributed flexibility that there undoubtedly is. And this is not just a system operator, not just a TSO and DSO task, it's a task for all of us. It's a task for market participants, it's a task for platform operators, it's a task for those who deal with the data exchange. And it is a challenge to take this into account, but we are not working for ourselves. We are working for the environment that we are active in, for our framework, for our customers, and basically in the end for all of you. And that is what we would like to take one step today. We are going to, of course, take other steps. And the legal frame, maybe we can just go on to the next chart. The legal frame is in Article 59, number 10, where it says what we will do. We will develop the text, and then in the end, submit it jointly as a draft text. But we have to look left and right and everywhere around us. And the drafting committee is a key component, and your participation, mostly probably also in the consultation, is another key component. So we are delighted that we can do this for everybody. We are delighted that we now, but also have a specific task of developing the text. And before we hand over to the different subgroups that will take you through different parts of the content that we are developing and also be open for discussion, I think it's a good time to hand the floor over to Sultan, who will give you a brief introduction of what there should be in the chat, what should be in the Q&A, and how we'll have a few polls in the end. Sultan.
Thank you, Torsten. For the ones who were not there from the beginning and joining now, I would like to repeat the logistics of today's workshop. So we have the Q&A section of the Teams. So you can use the Q&A section of the Teams chat here for submitting your questions, not the chat section, but the Q&A icon that is on the same section with the chat. So please use the Q&A part for submitting your questions throughout the webinar. And we will try to deal with them throughout the webinar if we have time to answer them. At the end of the workshop, we will have a Slido where we will give you the QR code and the code to join the Slido. And we would like to ask you a couple of questions to have your expectations and your views also considered. So that will be at the end of the presentation today. We will have the Slido section, but throughout the workshop, please use the Q&A part of the Teams to submit your questions for the attention of the presenters and the chairs of the workshop. Thank you.
Thanks, Sultan. I think then we should go, after giving the structure and the framework that we are operating in, we should then go forward to giving you an idea of what the content could be and the structure of how it is, and the questions we are addressing. And we've basically, for the development work, we formed 4 subgroups. These 4 subgroups will present one by one. You can, as Sultan said, have your questions in the Q&A, and they'll probably answer them at the end of their presentation. You'll notice that there is some difference in the format between the presentations, but that is intentional because we think the subgroups are working independently, and each subgroup finds their own form to present you with their contents. So it's over to the first subgroup, which is co-chaired by Paul David is there. Yeah, that's good to see that. And Zhao Do is there as well, and they'll take you through their content. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Zhao, you will start, right?
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Zhao Do. I work at ENTSO-E, the French transmission system operator. And I'm member of the development team, co-lead with Paul from TSO side for me. And we work on subgroup 1 on market access. Okay, so you can see that the future network code structure is quite close to the framework guidelines structure. And the subgroup 1 deals with the general provisions and the input for the markets. So for the first title deals with general provisions usually contained in every network code and guidelines. So it will present a subject matter which is related to what is mentioned in the Electricity Regulation Article 59.1E and also in the framework guideline, of course. We will have also the scope of this future rule, some definitions which will be used in the future rule on the basis of what is in the framework guideline and also with clarifications if necessary. We will have also the regulatory aspects on how this rule will be implemented. We will have one topic about the establishment or amendments of terms and conditions at different levels, European one, regional, national. For example, how common proposals shall be subject to approval to member states and published. And then we will have topics on publication, on public consultation, on stakeholders' involvement. And as these future rules tackle very broad and crucial issues on the valuation of the flexibilities in markets, we are really aware of the importance of the stakeholders' involvement during the drafting of this network code and also afterwards on how the stakeholders committee would follow the implementation of the rules and identify problems and propose improvement related to the areas covered by this new rule. And so we will have some delegation and assignment of task articles, some topic on recovery of cost and on confidentiality. So now for the title 2, Paul.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Paul de Wit. I work for Alliander. Alliander is a Dutch distribution system operator. And together with Yao, I chair or participate in subgroup 1 for the market access. Chapter 1, maybe part 1 of subgroup 1 is aggregation models. Part of the framework guideline is mentioned that an exhaustive list of aggregation models should be drawn by the network code on demand response. And well, that's that's rather a difficult task, I would say, because in every country there are differences and everyone has their own specificities, but per aggregation model or group of models, we should come up with the roles and responsibilities for market parties and also the interaction between the market parties. Especially attention then to the role of the balance responsible party in this and the aggregator, since there are aggregation models, of course. That's a very interesting topic, of course, the relation between the aggregators and the balance responsible parties. Also, the financial compensation of the parties involved is a topic which is have been discussed a lot in the past. Also, the costs of supplier and balance responsible benefits of the independent aggregators to other market parties. Yeah, that's also a European-wide process for further specifying and harmonizing the main elements of the possible types of aggregation models is also part of this chapter. Then the provisions of the service baseline and measurements. Well, a general part about the baseline. The baseline is considered from the perspective of the system operator in relation to the service provider, according to the framework guideline. The baseline represents a counterfactual reference about what the service provider's BRP allocated volume would be in the absence of the activated and the activation of the provision of the respective service. That's stated in the framework guideline. That's how it's been written. And we should come up with high-level principles for the baseline methodology. It could depend on the product. So different products could have different baselines or baselines methodologies. And as specified in the framework guideline, we should come up with the new rules shall define the minimum content to be included in the terms and conditions for service providers. Also, the conditions for the use of submetering is mentioned in the framework guideline under this specific chapter. And submetering is, of course, being heavily debated already for quite some time now. And especially the roles of the submeters and how it should be used is also then part of this part of chapter 2. And also the data exchange between the service providers and the system operators. Between the service providers and the system operators related to the service and validation of this part, the measurements and metering principles that follow under this chapter. So that's quite a broad chapter then. Also for the baseline is also the corrections should be taken into in consideration how it should be done. For chapter 3, the settlement, the general principles for the settlement and data exchange. Data exchange is not a separate chapter for us in the development for the network code for demand response. We more or less decided that the data exchange should be dealt with in the different chapters and in the different parts. So it will be a general topic which will recur also in other parts, but the data exchange is of course a very, very important part of the settlement. And we will not create a separate chapter for it. Use of measurement and volumes in the settlement and the imbalance settlement calculation. That's part of the settlement, and especially when there are multiple market participants simultaneously behind a metering point. That's of course where the most difficult topic is for the settlement part. If you have multiple BRPs with their own metering, how to deal with that and how to in different configuration, of course, for the balance responsible parties and their measurements. That's chapter 3, settlement, and chapter 4 is the system operators owned storage facilities. Also a topic which is debated a lot in the past. Specifically here, criteria to be fulfilled by the tendering procedure, possibility of shared ownership. And I think that's new in relation to the directive, that it also, the framework guideline also mentioned the option of shared ownership. But it should be considered as the second best solution. So first, it should be for the market to provide flexibility or the demand response service. Then a second best option would be a shared ownership, and then a third option could be for the system operator to own the storage. And that's according to the directive already in the clean energy package. So that's more or less, I would say, the title 2 for the general requirements for market access. And then, Jao, you will do the other topics, right?
Yeah. The subgroup 1, we also draft the 2 last titles of the network code related to regulatory legal provisions. So in the title 9, we have topics related to harmonization, conditions to derogations, and monitoring reports. Monitoring reports are summarized in the Annex 1 of the framework guideline. That is for the Title 9, derogations, harmonization, monitoring. And for the last title, it will handle, if needed, with the transitional provisions, the amendments of contracts and general terms and conditions of some services to be compliant with the requirements of this rule. And of course, the date of the entry into force of this network code. So that's all for us. So we have a legal part and a part from market access with quite very important lot of topics. That's all, Paul? Is that?
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Philipp Georg, now it's your turn. Please.
Yes, hello and good afternoon. Philipp Meyer from the German TSO Amprion. I coordinate the subgroup 2, which deals with pre-qualification, together with my colleague Georg Hartner. Yeah, let's dive into the draft agenda. So our subgroup mainly focus on the Title 3, market access and pre-qualification. This is divided into 6 chapters. Some are depicted on the next slide. And we also have, so to say, one guest role in another title, which is about the product design of congestion management products. Okay, chapter 1, this is about the general requirements. Topics which are addressed here is the pre-qualification for service providers. So what kind of legal and technical requirements have to be fulfilled by the service providers in order to participate in the SO service markets? And another topic would be the applicability of the product pre-qualification and product verification processes. So this is the overall allocation, which product has to undergo which process. So if you remember from the framework guideline, there are 2 different processes for the products, either the ex-ante version, the product pre-qualification, or the product verification, the ex-post process. And this topic, or in this chapter, we would like to rule that the standard balancing products have to undergo the ex-ante process, the product pre-qualification, and the local products and the specific products in the ex-post process by default. Although there are some exceptions, so it should be also ruled here under which conditions the system operator can deviate from this ex-post process for specific units or groups and prescribe the product pre-qualification. Then we also describe the criteria for a repetition or a renewal of the product pre-qualification or the product verification, depending on the product. So the overall principle here would be that for slight or moderate changes that do not influence the technical characteristics of a unit or a group, there should be no repetition or no renewal of a product pre-qualification or verification. But if a unit or group is majorly changed, of course, there should be another process. And switching of units between SPs or between SP service providing units or service providing groups under the same service provider. We are working on that, so it should be in general, of course, possible. And minimum technical requirements for the local services. Then in the next chapter 2, this is then the specific chapter for product pre-qualification. It is split into different topics, 3 topics. So the requirements for product pre-qualification in general, independent, whether it's a service, a standard balancing product we're talking about, or a local or specific balancing product. And then we have specific topics that we would like to address here. So specific provisions for the pre-qualification process for those standard balancing products, and specific provisions and process for the product pre-qualification for local SO services. And then there's one chapter for the ex post process for the product verification, and quite straightforward. So what kind of requirements apply to the product verification, and how does the process of product verification look like? And chapter 4 will probably also be in title 3, market access pre-qualification. This is about static grid pre-qualification, but our subgroup does not deal with grid pre-qualification. This is dealt by another subgroup, so it will be presented later on, but probably the content will be integrated here in this title. Thank you, and now I would like to hand over to my colleague, Georg.
Thank you, Philipp. My name is Georg Hartner from Austrian Energy Association, and I'm co-coordinating the Market Access and Pre-Qualification Group together with Philipp. The first chapters Philipp explained. In chapter 5, requirements on data exchange for pre-qualification, we focus a lot on flexibility registers. What are the principles and requirements for data exchange in the pre-qualification phase? What management-wise life cycle do we foresee for service providers, for service providing units, for service providing groups? Which procedures for pre-qualification can probably be harmonized across the European member state, EU member states? Which principles and requirements do we foresee for data management for product pre-qualification? So static grid pre-qualification for service providing units will have different characteristics than registering for a product on different markets, obviously at different platform operators. Which principles do we foresee for data governance and interoperability? We need to account for data portability. We need to account for provisions to ensure level playing fields also for the future, to avoid improper vendor lock-ins, and also to ensure that we allow for some innovation and the competition of platforms and solutions for the future. Of course, there is a lot around data management in this chapter. Then chapter 6, national harmonization of market access processes. There we need to account for the principles for the national implementation, the development of the national terms and conditions for data exchange requirements in pre-qualification. There we have a very specific challenge for the table of equivalencies, which is a tool specified in the framework guidelines that should put member states in the position to somehow rank products by their complexity and enable service providers to just pre-qualify once for a more complex product and then reuse this classification, this pre-qualification information for less complex products. This might sound simple, but it has a number of side effects that we need to consider and put into a legal text. So this is more or less the data exchange, data management for pre-qualification part. And also in our subgroup is the topic on congestion management products, the list of attributes of products for congestion management, the requirements for the definition of congestion management products, and also if we look at products coming from wholesale markets, how and to which degree and what are the requirements for utilizing them for congestion management services. Thank you.
Thanks to Georg and Philip. Just a brief reminder to everybody. I know that you're interested in this topic, and you have the opportunity to use the Q&A to answer questions right when they are during the presentation, and we are more than happy to answer them. You can also post comments if you want that. And our intention here is not just to basically give you an idea of what we are doing, but also to get your feedback on what we are doing, get your additional ideas you have, get your opinions on what we are doing and how we should do it. So again, please use the opportunity to have. I know it's only via the Q&A, but unfortunately we cannot have the possibility for you to take the floor, as we are 350 participants in this webinar, which is very encouraging. But please use the opportunity to put forward what you think. And with this, I hand over to you. You can of course also still enter questions or comments on the first group and on the second group, but now I hand over to the third group, which is Olivia and Yvonne, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is Yvonne Rueda, and I'm from the Swedish DSO, Vattenfall Distribution, and I'm coordinating this group on market design together with Olivia.
Yeah, my name is Olivia Alonso Garcia from Spanish TSO Red Eléctrica, and pleased to coordinate this with Yvonne.
So we are working on the market design for local services, and we are working firstly with one thing from the
Yvonne, you are muted.
Yes. So we have within market design for local services, we are working with Title I, general provisions, and we're working on the formal process for establishing the common DSO and TSO proposals. And then on the Title IV, overall market design for local services, we are working on 3 chapters. The first chapter on general principles that contains the national terms and conditions for overall market design for local services, the procurement and pricing principles, the principles for interaction between markets, and the choosing between the options. Then we have the chapter 2 on products that was just mentioned, and the chapter 3 on the requirements to local market operators and to TSOs and DSOs. Next page. So on the formal process for establishing the common DSO and TSO proposals, the network code shall state the requirement for a formal process when developing the common DSO proposals for national terms and conditions in each member state. And there are 3 national terms and conditions, 1 for the service providers, 1 for the overall market design for local services, and 1 for the coordination. Within these, we have common requirements for the processes when you are establishing the common proposals, that contains the involvement of stakeholders and also the deadline for submission and the NRA approval. The NRA will be allowed to give derogation within the maximum period and with transparency.
Coming to the title 4 on market design for local services, the network code shall state requirements that DSOs and TSOs shall consider for market-based congestion management and active power for voltage control. The network code will mandate national terms and conditions to be developed for overall market design for these local services that need to be developed in line with the principles in the network code. They will contain detailed rules on roles and responsibilities and interactions between the different entities, procurement and pricing rules, coordination between market rules, requirements to local market operators, and transparency rules. The network code shall state what are those principles for procurement and pricing. These set transparency principles, principles for cost efficiency, technological neutrality. Very clearly, the pricing mechanism may be different from the mechanism applied in wholesale market, and the pricing may be set in long-term contracts, and there may be differences between long-term and short-term products. And the network code shall state also principles for interaction between markets. We are developing principles to ensure that the local markets do not unduly distort wholesale markets, that withholding capacities are minimized, there's no aggravation of system needs, that sufficient liquidity is ensured in all markets. The possibility to propose unused bids to other markets shall be clearly stated, and principles for the same bid not being selected twice. Also principles for interoperability and portability, always aiming at cost efficiency. Access for service providers and relevant system operators to the local market shall be guaranteed. And additionally, we are drafting some articles with regards requirements and tasks for local market operators in line with framework guidelines, requirements to DSOs and TSOs when procuring services, and transparency requirements and publication requirements.
So, and then also within the market designs, we have the issue on the options, and the network code shall state that the TSO and DSOs are to select the more effective and efficient option, and high-level requirements on this will be drafted. And also principles for the use of congestion management products on the one hand and non-firm connection agreements on the other, ensuring that markets are not unduly distorted. So with this, we will leave over to the next group.
Yeah, before we go over to the next group, I've seen that there are a few questions in the Q&A section. I again encourage you to add to these. I've also seen in the chat that there was the question whether we're just going to present the content, or are we also going to tell you more about what we are doing there. Again, put it forward in the Q&A section, what interests you most, and we'll certainly be able to give more detail on these topics. We cannot give an overview of everything in depth because there's such a broad range of topics that is here. So we'll basically react in this interactive workshop to what interests you most. I've seen, if I'm correct, I've seen 3 questions until now. I think the one from Leopold, that's explicitly directed at Georg Hartner. Mike, I think that your question is probably best for Daniel and Robert, that will come next, but they'll probably also take note of that has already been asked. And I think the question from Thomas is perfectly well placed with Olivia and Yvonne. Shall we maybe ask Georg to reply to Leopold first, then we come to Olivia and Yvonne, who might give further idea on what Thomas has asked, and then we'll go on to the next part. Is that okay? So Georg, if you would like to maybe give an indication for what Leopold asked.
Yes, of course. I have also been busy writing it in the chat together with a link. So Leopold asked which concrete products are included in the term congestion management services. We say we are not focusing on, we are focusing on the attributes that products for congestion management show to allow for EU-wide comparability, and concrete products will be defined at a national level. So the topic by itself is a very complex one, and I recommend that you scan the DSO-TSO joint roadmap. I've put the link in the Q&As where a lot around this is explained. But the concrete products, we are not putting it in the legal text.
Daniel Roberts, would you like to take the question, SSGL core?
Yes, we do. Yeah, if you want, Robert, we can present our topic, and later when you arrive to this topic, we can answer the question. It's just to put in context, do you think we can do it that way? Yes. I introduce myself. I'm Daniel David Arderius. I'm working in E-Distribución. This is a Spanish DSO. So in my case, me and Robert Keliak and me are leading the subgroup number 4. We are handling the TSO, DSO, and DSO-TSO coordination, data change requirements, network development plans, and voltage control. First of all, we have intention to have 4 titles. The first one is about distribution network development plans. As you will see in the framework guideline, there is something written about that, but in that point, it's important to have in mind that something is written also ruled in the directive, in the Article 32. And here, what we should rule is about general principles on how do we make the grid planning, considering, well, the characteristics at national level, a guidance of considering flexibility, demand response, what is written in the directive as alternative for grid reinforcement. We should define national level how this new methodology, or how the methodologies for grid planning should also consider the TYNDP, the coordination made and the planning made by TSO, the scenarios, and how the coordination between TSOs and DSOs should be done at national level. It's also written in the framework guideline that we should perform public information processes. This was written in the directive, but the framework guideline requires us more principles, try to push and go a step forward in that direction. It's important to say that this title will be the title that the part of the process that will trigger all the rest of the processes. So the idea is that many flexibility or an important quantity of flexibility can be procured in the long term that later will be activated close to the real time. So, for instance, we will see now coordination areas, coordination groups, some issues about TSO-DSO coordination that will start not as we can have in mind nowadays in the day ahead, 2 days ahead, but also in the long term. So many issues that you have seen before will start in the TYNDP, sorry, in the distribution network plans. So I give the floor to Robert. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Kielak. I work for PSE Polish TSO. In the title 6, for the coordination between TSO and DSOs and between DSOs, we handle these topics of the coordination between us. And because we are representing different TSOs and DSOs, small, medium, large DSOs, and also closed distribution system operators, we need to work hard to harmonize the rules because we also operating different voltage ranges between our member states. So it's our work will focus on the harmonizing at EU level methods of forecasting congestions and solving them. This title represents point 4.3 of system operation coordination from the framework guidelines. And in the framework, we need to develop general principles for the coordination area and levels of coordination. This coordination area is foreseen as a group of grid elements, users, and connection points that may be affected by congestions, may provide solution to this congestion, and there is maybe a need to provide information to forecast or detect or solve such congestion. One system operation coordination area may cover parts of the grids of several system operators and overlap with other system operation coordination. When developing this concept, we will build upon the observability area, the concept which is already used in the system operation guideline. Those coordination area need to be assessed regularly by the system operators. New rules shall provide principles for detecting situations where areas and corresponding system coordinations levels are required. Selecting different levels of coordination with the system operation group is also part of this rule. Should also be part of these rules. The highest level of coordination shall include at least following topics. It should include data exchange, grid operation and forecast for grid operation, solutions for solving the congestion or voltage control issues, and network development planning, as described in Article 32 of Electricity Directive. Principles for forecasting congestion and voltage control issues need to have sufficient granularity of data and need to be selected in the most efficient way to solve these congestions. There is also the topic of the open positions. That means that when offer is activated for the purpose of the local system operator, may be created an open position, and such position on the market should be closed within the reasonable time. In the most efficient solution shall be chosen, and the cost shall be allocated to the system operator in whose grid congestion appeared. The last bullet here is about the grid pre-qualification, which was mentioned by my colleagues in the subgroup second already. It is about limiting the offer to the market, congestion market or voltage control market, due to some grid constraints in the day ahead or in the longer period of operational planning. While developing such concept of grid pre-qualification, we will take as a starting point the role which is already in place for the balancing services established in SOGL network code. And for all of these rules and principles, we need some national implementation. I go back to the first bullet in this title, because of variety of solutions and DSOs, we assume that it's going to be needed some national implementation to be in place. Next slide, please. Title 7 is about data exchange requirements from grid users, and in this title, we'll set the rules for the data requirements from the grid users. Of course, all activities I described in the previous title cannot be done without relevant data. While developing the the requirements for the data from the grid users. We will start with the concept which is already in place in SOGL, with the structural, scheduled, and forecast data, and of course real-time data. And here I would like to go back to the question in the chat. The question was, in terms of data exchange, do you foresee any direct interaction with the text of SOGL and core? Yes, we do foresee. And I just mentioned that we will start to build this concept just exactly on these articles referred in SOGL. And do you think there might be a need for consequential SOGL and or core amendments? So for this question I cannot answer yet, because we are still at the starting point, and we do not know what will be the result of our analysis. I hope the answer is suitable for you, and maybe we could provide later during the public consultation later in the time. Thank you, and by this I'm giving the floor back to Daniel.
Thank you, Robert. So the last part is the last title is about voltage control, and I will start explaining what is voltage control because I've seen one question in the chat. Voltage control in the framework guideline, it's a concern about reactive energy, because what is written in the same framework guideline is that if the active energy is used to control voltage, this is thought, I think, in the lowest voltage grids, they should follow the principles for the active energy products, in other words, for congestion management products. So here, what we have in mind, and for what we understand from the framework guideline, is regarding reactive energy. What we should define here is we should define the guideline mandates that market-based procurement should be the priority. We should write in that way how this should be done, which are the list of attributes. These attributes should have some characteristics. And what is also considered in the framework guideline is that this refers particularly to the mandatory capacities beyond what the voluntary capacity beyond the mandatory requirements in the national implementation of requirements for generators or demand connection code. So this is what should be written here. And there is another part about, well, the national regulatory assessment. What is also recognized in the framework guideline is that this market-based procurement can be complemented by rule-based procurement, as is made in many of the countries. So I think in this title is where there is less things done in projects and in reality, because market-based procurement in reactive energy, there is less things. And at that point, there is also one thing you cannot see any specific article, but it's regarding the reports, because the provision 106 mandates to, well, DSOs, TSOs should publish monitoring reports, including where this market-based procurement for reactive energy is made or not, the volumes of energy traded, and how this flexibility is procured. What we are thinking, and this is why it not appears here intentionally, is that perhaps we will create a specific title for all the assessments, all the reports we should do, in order to facilitate the national implementation. So there are two ways to do that. One is a niche title, but perhaps, as if you see the framework guideline in the last page, all them are listed. Probably we will include all them together in the same title. So probably in the title of a general part, we will include that point. So I don't have anything else. I don't know if there is another question we should answer, or just to Torsten.
There are numbers of questions coming in, which is very good and extremely encouraging. And I'll give the floor to Fabio, who obviously wants to reply to at least one of them directly. Just pointing out there is the possibility, in order so that we can arrange these questions about how important all of you consider them, there is the possibility to like them for all of you. All of you can give a thumbs up to a question, and the more thumbs there are to a question, of course, then it indicates that this is a topic that's of more interest to many of you. So if you can have a look there, and if you are interested in something that has been asked already, give it a like, and then we'll basically put it to the front of the queue. Yeah. But now Fabio wants to make sense of these questions and assign them, order them, whatever. Go ahead, please.
Let's try a bit, no? Because there are some, I think, more general questions which could be addressed to you and myself, Thorsten. So I see one is about whether we will not or will take into account what's happening with the electricity market design provision. Another question was when this thing will enter into operation. I think this could also be handled by the two of us, Thorsten and myself. And I think earlier I saw a question also on how the regulatory assistance project 2035 energy system blueprint will be considered, to which extent, things like that. So maybe we take these three and then we deep dive into the others. What do you think?
I can take the one on EMD and you take the other two if you want to.
Perfect. Please.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Aurelia, for asking that. We had a discussion in that. We had a discussion on the development team, and I think we have a clear opinion on that one. There were originally votes that said we are only going to write a document based on existing legislation. So if there's a proposal, why should we take that into account? However, this will come fast. We all are astonished by the speed that the rapporteurs have set their reports for the EMD package. This will come fast. And there's no sense in making rules for a framework that will not exist once the rules come into effect. So we've had a unanimous decision that we say yes, as far as we can see it, and as far as we can judge this, we will take the EMD proposals into account, for example, about dedicated metering or measurement devices, about flexibility in general, about different products, and we'll try to incorporate that into the text that we suggest. Yes, we will try to work as good as we can within the future framework. I hope that answers it conclusively. Fabio.
Yes, obviously, I mean, this is, we had some discussions, but in the end, I think it's the only logical conclusion that we can apply is to consider what's there, and the proposal is there, and so far everybody seems determined to bring this into to conclusion before the next elections. So of course it makes sense for us also to consider what's there, and if there are and will be changes through the trilogue, of course, let's say we will consider it before we submit the whole thing. Which brings me actually to the other questions. How does our process work? I think briefly I said it, or you could sense it from the timeline. It's more or less determined by the electricity regulation, of course. Now, the same article that describes how we deal with stakeholders. It also describes more or less the process of how this network code shall be drafted. We have time more or less until March 2024 to submit this to ACER. ACER then has up to 6 months to make revisions if they think it's not in line with what was written in the framework guidelines, with the overall expectations. Maybe there will be some iterations, but they have 6 months to do this and then to present it to the Commission. After that, it's not so strict in terms of, let's say, deadlines, how much the Commission will take to actually approve it. You've seen this for previous network codes. It may take some time. It depends always on how this works. But say overall, I think imagining that this thing will become reality, legislative reality by early 2025, I think is a good workable assumption. So we're drafting something that will enter into force 2025, which means directly into force for each and every member state, because this is a delegated act. Of course, it will not go through a trilogue. Just as a reminder, this is Commission approval, of course, interacting with in the comitology process with the member states, but not formally through a trilogue. So this could become very quick process. So my guess is somewhere in 2025 this will be the reality. Okay, then I think there was a question, more generic question about how, let's say this study about locational prices, will be taken into account, or to which extent we can take this into account. So I think we have to make first a statement about the scope, of course, of this network code. The scope of this network code is not to make any obligations in terms of market design. So how a member state would like to organize their markets, to which extent they would provide locational price signals or tariff signals to each and every end user. So this is, the network code is not about this. Just to be clear, Delegated Act would never reach this level of detail in terms of obligations for end users. So this will always be a decision which will be taken at a higher level, meaning at second-year legislation or at the member state decision. However, and this is, I think, important to stress, we can make things possible, because right now we are defining, for example, product attributes for congestion management projects. And this, of course, later on, if and to which extent, of course, this is left to member states. If a member state decides to go for more location-specific prices, of course, it would be good if they have this information, the location information, for example, of a bid, of a price, of a constraint. So what we are doing, we are more defining the tools, I would say, but the overall decision does not lie in the hands of this team, to be very frank.
I've seen that having a look at likes, there's a clear favorite. The clear favorite is the question from Bjarkan on will there be a separate handling of the low voltage grid level, for instance, simplification of framework that does not add costs, where a coordination will be too costly throughout the marketplace designed for HV, MV levels. I think that could probably be well answered by Paul and or Zhao.
Yeah, do you want it now? I assume you want to have it now, yeah. Will there be a separate handling of low voltage grid level? We're investigating this topic, I would say. We're checking, and I think it's more if we are further in the process, then we can give a more precise answer to this. I think, of course, small connections and large connections have different characteristics. Specifically, the very small ones, they usually should be they should be aggregated for convenience, of course, and very large ones you do not normally aggregate, and that when you want them specifically individually taken into account. That's for the large connections. For the smaller connections, of course, if you do the aggregation and if it's helpful for congestion, the aggregation should be in the congestion area, of course, and that's makes it specific then for the aggregation connections. Zhao, would you like to add something to that?
What I can add is that we should reduce and suppress any barriers that will avoid some resources, some actors to take part into the markets. So, as you say, Paul, until now we don't know if we'll make differences between voltages, but we know that we'll try to do as simple as possible for any market actors.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks to the two of you. I have the runner-up is a question about non-firm connections. Any volunteers to answer that one? Will the code include requirements for non-firm connections? If so, what are the TSO, DSO coordination arrangements for this type of connections? Thanks, Miguel, for that question. Daniel?
Yes, I can answer this question. Thank you. First of all, the framework guideline mandates about market-based procurement, as you will see, and non-fair connection has appeared in several groups. You've seen, I think, Ivonne or Olivia have mentioned something. obviously they will appear in the network code, but we need to see, and probably they are also related in the network development plan. But we need to see how this might be aligned. But anyway, this is part of the issues that in some part of the process should appear, because some countries has this in place. Anyway, we are at the starting point, deciding issues, studying, but this is one of the points we have in mind. Thank you for the point.
Can I just add? I mean, it's going to be high-level principles, more on the use of congestion management products on the one hand and non-firm connection agreements on the other. So it's not about having rules on non-firm connection agreements in the network code.
Exactly. We're defining products. These products may include market-based non-firm connections and other things. That's all for my.
Overall, the same answer applies as to locational prices. Now, we do not substitute, of course, decision makers in which tools they want to use, but we can make tools available that are not present today. I think scrolling the Q&A list, we had a question again from Miguel, at least this one I see, on the topic of data required from grid users. Do you see the need for a user to provide the same data for the TSO and the DSO independently? I think that's a nice question for Philip and Georg, maybe. Otherwise, please feel free to step forward, also from the others.
What? Which one?
From Miguel. See,
on
the topic of data required from grid users. Do you see the need for a user to provide the same data for the DSO and the TSO independently?
Oh, well, the same. Especially in our chapter, and it's there's a number of data that we will require for a different set of processes. Depends on if you're talking about at the market phase, the settlement phase, the preparation phase, operation, coordination phase, and stuff. So different market roles will require different types of data, different processes will require different types of data. But what we are striving for throughout the whole network code is to make it as simple and as straightforward as possible, also to make it as understandable as possible, and to minimize the efforts that market actors have in, to participate in these markets, to offer that will be very good for liquidity, also for value stacking. It is important to aim for an only once attitude. So if it's avoidable, you will not have to provide the same data twice. If it's not avoidable, you will have to. But we are striving to minimize, standardize, streamline, make it understandable. That's the answer that I think we can give you.
Thanks. Shall we have the one on the there's a question about what kind of voltage control products are part of these network codes, and with further details asked. Maybe that's something for Daniel and/or Robert.
Yes, well, I think we tried to answer this question in my presentation of my title. The idea of voltage control products will be made of reactive energy. This is what is considered, because what is written in the framework guideline is that if we need to activate active energy products to control the voltage, we should follow the same rules than congestion management products. So the idea is that at the end, voltage control will only be considered regarding reactive energy. I think this is the answer. If you need something else, you can ask further, but I think this is what you want to know, your doubt.
Thanks. Then I'd like to answer one. One is from Harish on the RED Article 28, the need to share information on renewable power generation with all stakeholders in near real-time basis. Has this been taken into account? No, I don't think that is a topic of our network code. It's about the use of flexibility that is connected to the distribution net grids. This is basically a data provision article on the status of generation. So that is not in the scope of the network code. Fabio, what's next here? General question from Eric Haugen on question about local SO services and markets. Supply and demand will be at each location in the grid, and bits must be marked with locational grid information. How's the split of liquidity and the risk of high costs for procuring flexibility going to be handled? Cross prices for SO services, both congestion and voltage, will be at each individual grid location, and the bits will be spread all over different grid locations. Maybe Olivia and Yvonne on market structure?
Yeah, I think there will not be just one way to coordinate between markets. And I think it will look a little bit different depending on how you coordinate. But I also want to say something that I think applies on many of the questions. The network code will not be like a finished product where everything will be implemented day one everywhere, because some of the things will be developed over time. So you will not start with perhaps having locational grid information in all markets. But it will be the possibility to work with locational grid information. So I think you have to see that this is also a process where some things will be like mandatory from day one, and some things will come by time.
Thanks, Yvonne. There's a new question. I can take that one. Are you addressing the rules for participation in different marketplaces cross-border? And if yes, how the national rules should be harmonized in order to facilitate this? I think most of the products procured here are, or many of the congestion management products, especially if we are looking at a DSO level, probably local products, so there will be no cross-border access to marketplace. However, we are certainly aware that market participants, if they want to offer their products in general, not a specific product, but what they are doing, how that they are doing, how they are gathering customers, for example, if they want to offer that in order to gather the economies of scale, they have to do it in different member states, not necessarily cross-border, but they have to be active in different member states. And of course, we are taking it in all these points a very close look at harmonization topics. We're not just asking about what could be a solution, but we are especially also always asking in very much detail what has to be harmonized in order to mobilize the potential of flexibility. And yes, that is a topic in this respect that we are very well aware of the need that market participants probably need a more harmonized framework in order to be active in different member states. Fabio, maybe?
Yeah, I see questions on CCRs. Maybe this is something, so I'll read out loudly. Martin Pistora asks, how will the coordination areas be linked with processes in the capacity calculation regions? I don't know, maybe Olivia, this could be something you can reply to.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the network code requirements for local markets should be compatible with the existing provisions for solving congestion management. This is very clear indication also from framework guideline. Coordination area, we are still discussing how implementing them in the framework, in the network code, but it may be the case the coordination area is not a market area. It's more the structural information. It's kind of linked with the observability. Therefore, there's no competition between coordination areas and CCRs in terms of geographical scope of the market. What we need is to ensure that wherever the geographical scope of the local market is, the solutions are compatible with the existing higher layer of solutions, for congestion management. This is very clear from framework guideline paragraph 17.
An easy one for Georg and Philip. Do you agree that it may be useful to include a provision that pre-qualifications can be handled in digital form instead of paper?
Yeah, I think this is also already a requirement from the framework guideline, if I'm not mistaken. So yes, we would foresee that the pre-qualification is fully digital.
Agree.
I said it's an easy one. Then there's one on network development plans, DSO network development plans. Do you plan to guide NRAs and network companies on how to assess alternative congestion solutions in the contents of network development plans? I think probably Daniel. No?
Yes, which one is it? I was reading.
It's Susanna.
Susanna Pato.
Is in the chat or in the
It's in the Q&A. We are only looking at Q&A now.
Okay, because can you repeat me, please? Sorry, the question, because I wasn't. What is the question about? If we are
Susanna Pato asks, do you plan to guide NRAs and network companies on how to assess alternative congestion solutions, wire versus non-wire, in the context of network development plans?
Exactly. This is the purpose. That the idea is the network development plan should include flexibilities and alternative of grid reinforcements. And we have to write about how this methodology to assess, not only the methodology to plan and the methodology to assess this flexibility can play, also based on a scenario. So this is the mandate we have to write. The other issue is that the national implementation, the regulator should develop the national rules, because in many countries there are national rules, national regulation about how this should be done. But of course, flexibility is an alternative to wire investments. But I also have to say, I don't know if all the wire investments, because there may be aging cables, I don't know if in that case this also should apply. So we need to think on that. I don't know, okay. Robert, you want to compliment me or because someone wants to compliment me?
Thank you.
Then there's one from Manuel Sanchez. Good to see that you're in the workshop. Good to see that you're asking a question about the governance of TCs and the methodologies developed, proposed by system operators to come to the TCs. Is it about what's the role of the NRA? Does it approve the TC or can it ask for amendments? Under which conditions? And what's the role of Acer? Paul Zhao.
Yes, but I think that I think it's also a part of subgroup 3, but
it's more Yvonne and Olivia. Sorry, I was getting confused here. Apologies. Yvonne and Olivia. There you go.
I could not read the question. Sorry, it's not refreshed. But
I can read it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
No, but the NRA, they will approve the national TNCs. So it will be an NRA approval on the proposals from the DSOs and TSOs. And then the requirements will be evaluated and reported. And this was something that Paul and Joe was talking about before. And then they will also have to suggest further harmonization. And of course, here Acer will have a role to play in discussing the further harmonization and in the evaluation of the requirements. Does this give a clear picture? So the DSOs and TSOs that come with the proposals, the NRAs in each member state will have their say on the proposals, but further harmonization will be evaluated and discussed, and Acer will come in with their say on that the next coming perhaps 8-10 years.
And if not clear, Manuel, then follow up in the Q&A, and we'll try to provide more detail. I see that we didn't answer the one from Tony. Is that right? As of now, is the intention that customer requirements for elective product provision is kept totally separate from mandatory requirements that must be satisfied before first energization is allowed, or is there any intent that some flexibility requirements will be mandated and tested in all cases, whether subsequently used or not? I think that's about testing of flexibility possibilities. Is it about product pre-qualification? Then it will be Georg and Philip.
So Georg, can you answer it? To be honest, since I cannot read the question, I didn't fully get it.
Yeah, can you please repeat the question? I was just answering to Miguel in the chat. Sorry.
We went with two or three different chats, and of course the call itself. We are trying to be multifunctional here. Is it the intention that customer requirements for product provision is kept totally separate from mandatory requirements that must be satisfied before first energization is allowed? Or is there any intent that some flexibility requirements will be mandated and tested in all cases, whether subsequently used or not? I think that's about general product. As far as I understand it, it's about general product requirements, provision requirements, and flexibility requirements. It's about the necessity to pre-qualify certain flexibility requirements. But maybe I have a misunderstanding here that could also be Fabio.
Same understanding. No, it's basically about the trade-off between ex post verification and ex ante pre-qualification. I think the framework guidelines are quite clear here. I think it's a good moment to repeat what's in the framework guidelines and the way we are approaching it, ex ante versus ex post.
From which person is the question here? I'm really having
Tony
trouble.
Tony Hearn.
But I don't understand the word energization here. Is that when the customer is connected? Is that before you get your first electricity, or?
Yeah, I would intend it in the terms of using the energy service, the flexibility service that has been asked for. So maybe, just to answer more generally about the ex ante versus ex post, of course, the network code framework guideline of this network code that were published by ASA in the final version, they say that for certain services, ex post verification shall be the default process, and only in specific cases we could also go back to what we call ex ante pre-qualification. Ex ante pre-qualification would be I test everything I need before the first activation of the product. So in order that I'm sure that you can actually deliver and so on and so on. I think the exact criteria when to go from ex post to ex ante, these are still being discussed. But the overall intention, at least for certain services from ASA, is to make the ex post a default process. Please, Philip, Georg, if you understood something different.
I mean, it's a bit difficult because there is maybe a little difference between pre-qualification and setting service providing units or groups up in at an IT platform of a vendor. So it's a bit of a challenge for how we differ between activation tests or onboarding of potential participants and pre-qualification or ex post verification, right? So that is what we are elaborating at the moment, to make it as simple as possible and to account for the requirement to make it as simple as possible for the participants to onboard. But there is, you know, at some point you will need to know about a service providing unit or group, and that means that they need to register at this or that platform. Do we count this as an ex-ante pre-qualification or not? I think no, but that's a little question. It's a bit of a challenge to find a proper legal text here, but we are working on this.
I will add one point. No, sorry.
No, it's Daniel. You would like to add something?
Yes, because I see the question, and for voltage control, what is defined at the end is not totally disaligned with what you are requesting in the connection process. So if you look at the framework guideline, the voltage control products are based on what you are request when you connect as mandatory. From that point, the product is defined. So in that way, the requirements satisfied in the connection point are the starting point to the final product. So they are totally integrated, I will say, particularly in the voltage control. I think it's the most clear case. Sorry for that. Just to complement your question. Thank you.
I take the opportunity also for those who were a bit later, who joined a bit later, to come back to the very first question we received, which was, will you publish the slides? The answer is, of course, yes, we will, on the event page, and Sultan will copy paste the link to the event page in the chat, so you can go to that link and download the slides after the meeting. But of course, they will be published.
Yeah, thank you, Fabio. It will be published tomorrow. I will put the link to the event page here in the chat now, so you can download the presentations that we're using today in the workshop tomorrow. It will be already available there.
Thank you, Sultan.
Thanks, Sultan. I have one question left, if I've not overlooked something, and that is from Srinivasa Raju. The requirements from this workshop will reflect into additional requirements to network codes and connection requirements. Basically, what they mean of what is meant, of course, probably is existing network codes and connection requirements. How they will be more harmonized within TSO. So the question is about existing network codes and whether there will be more harmonization. Will the stakeholders from the manufacturers take part of this process? Please, can we have more details of the controls and requirements? I think that is a TSO question. It's about existing network codes, Fabio.
Maybe the general answer is about the existing network codes. This is also clearly stated in the mandate we received from the European Commission. Basically, it says that you should develop a network code on demand response following the framework guidelines, but also identify, if needed, of course, if amendments are needed to existing network codes and guidelines. Now, this is not a decision that has been taken. We're working on content so far, not on housing. But of course, I mean, I would imagine reading through the framework guidelines, it talks about a standardization of standard balancing products in terms of pre-qualification. This is, of course, a natural evolution that will have to follow after this network code, be it in an amendment of EBGL or be it in this kind of network code. But in general terms, let's say, it's what's stated in the framework guidelines that is our, let's say, our template, our blueprint for developing this network code, irrespective of whether this will then lead to an amendment of existing network codes or whether it will be in this new network code. I've named the standard balancing products and pre-qualification harmonization because it's one of the key elements, I think, of the lighthouse elements that it's listed there. If some TSO member wants to compliment me, of course, come forward. Okay.
I think we've tried to answer in all brevity and but also in the Q&A section in the chat all the questions that came forward. I hope we did this at least to some of your satisfaction. But there are different ways to be in contact, which was what we have taken a look at the beginning. So thank you for your active participation. It was really encouraging. If there are no more things, then we would now like to close the Q&A session and then proceed, and that's over to Fabio.
Yes, I think we can now move on with the slides. There's now an interactive part. So you can join this link on Slido. For those who are familiar with Slido, or not familiar with Slido, you go on the slido.com and just enter this code with 7 digits, 3426904, or if you're with your phone, you scan the QR code, and then you will find yourself on the Slido page. I was just waiting that some of you can actually join. Give you a few moments. And then I would actually hand over
in between, I just would like to make the remark, we were at almost 350 participants, and at the end of the Q&A session, we were down to 280, which given a comparison with other similar events is really not bad. You tend to bleed much more. You tend to bleed up to 2/3 of the participants if you're just into half into the event. So I think it's another good sign that you stayed there all of the time, that you not just dialed in, but that it obviously was interesting enough to keep your attention. Thank you for that.
Okay, perfect. I see that Sultan also provided the link in the chat box. Sultan, would you like to introduce the Slido part?
Yes, so thank you, Fabio. As you have mentioned, for joining the Slido, you can use slido.com, enter this 7-digit code and join in there, or scan the QR code. So once we have that, maybe we can already present the questions that we have. So maybe I can move on there. And the first question that we have would be, how can the major gaps identified within the framework of guideline be addressed by the network code demand response? So please feel free to type in your answers.
Open question. I think this is an opportunity now for you also to provide some input, provide answers, and we will collect all of them. I think this helps us to structure a bit the forthcoming months if something is missing. If you think something is missing.
Exactly. Yeah, it would be also a good opportunity to raise your expectations and how you see the shape and the form of it coming in. So we would definitely collect answers and analyze them as well.
Very encouraging. Interesting answers. So I'm always amazed and surprised what comes out of this live Q&A, this active interactive Q&A. I think in one, I've read the public consultation. Just as a reminder, of course, we have planned a public consultation, a 2-month public consultation of the full draft network code. This should be around end of August to end of October, roughly. And I think this is an opportunity for all of you. So this is really a public consultation for all of you. It's an opportunity to react to what has been written. Of course, feel free to react only on the parts that actually affect you most, because this is a complicated network code. I mean, I've stated in the beginning, so far we have done quite a lot of operation, market codes, connection codes, but never one specific about demand. The point is, of course, demand is touching a bit of the market processes, on operations, on connections. It's all in there. So, of course, this will be a long network code with all these topics.
Thank you, Fabio. Okay. Then I see DSO coordination, which is also part of the scope. stakeholder involvement as well.
Somebody mentions value stacking. This was also mentioned in the meeting of the drafting committee on Friday, and various stakeholders put forward that they consider this to be essential. And we think because we are designing or developing a network code on a market-based allocation of flexibilities, this is at the core of it. We are only doing this in order, in the end, you're only doing a market-based system in order to enable value stacking. Include more the market participants in order to help boost and diversify the ideas. I think we are already doing the best we can, but your next big opportunity will be there in the public consultation. Incorporation of the feedback of stakeholders, yes. Same reply. Don't forget about the public consultation that's open to everybody. But we also have to, you have to make it manageable. In order to make it manageable, we do have the drafting committee, which is, of course, also in the electricity regulation, and all associations of vital stakeholders are there, and they voice the opinion on the topics that there are.
So put in the same link. Okay.
I like the maintaining a customer-centric approach. Yes, indeed, I can confirm we all have one, and we will maintain it. Sufficient harmonization in order to participate across member states. Yeah, that's what we already talked about.
Interoperability and standard requirements. I think that's also an interesting one, important one. We agree, of course, it's one of the guiding principles.
Minimum changes. Not so sure about that. Whether the objective is the minimum of change. I think it's the objective should be an appropriate amount of change.
Yeah, probably to keep what is good, what is working, but to add on top of that things that are missing, especially for the smaller flex resources.
I'm not sure that we will focus on technologies. I think the idea is to be technology agnostic. That is why the demand response code includes active customers that also provide flexibility from generation and storage. So we would rather have to have an open approach about technologies so that dynamic market participants can find the best technology.
Wholesale market participation. I think this is an interesting one, but probably a bit out of scope. So there's, of course, flexibility and demand response are important topics from a wholesale market perspective, but this network code specifically has the scope of system services, of system operator services. So we probably will not touch upon how the day-ahead market works, how the intraday market works.
As long as you limit the scope to consider only the grid and no market design evolution, there are limits to what we can do. We are not going to reinvent the market design in this network code, definitely not. We are not going to reinvent or significantly modify CACM, or we are not going to reinvent or significantly change balancing in what we are doing here. Things might have to be addressed, who knows, but we can only keep it workable by limiting the scope of what we are doing. And I think the first 20 or so articles of the framework guideline also make clear on what we should do and especially also what we shouldn't do.
Yeah, I mean, we have a mandate. We can move and operate within the fence of this mandate. Again, I think we cannot substitute secondary legislation with a delegated act.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Interesting. No, thanks. We will, of course, store. Yeah, please, Sultan.
Yeah, thank you, Fabio. Maybe we can move to the second question. I see that there is a high participation, which is always very good. And let's see, the second question is basically about the expectations from the public workshop during the consultation phase. As Fabio and Torsten mentioned, we will have a public consultation open to everyone, of course, with the first draft that we will have, and that will be up for your comments and proposals for the amendments. And we would like to know what are your expectations from this public workshop. So please feel free to type in your expectations. Maximum 3-word limit. I know that it's a quite tight limit, but let's see what are the answers.
So this will become a word cloud or something like this. Yeah, keep it coming. While we, for those of you who have disconnected, you can always reconnect with the QR code and type in your expectations for the public workshop, which is an important date.
More details, I think I can promise that.
Indeed. I mean, keep in mind, we are at the beginning of the process. So right now, details are also missing on our side. It's not that we don't want to share them, but they're being developed, as the name development team says. Yeah, but it's a clear indication, I think. Huh? People want to get their hands dirty.
Yeah. And the public consultation, you will get a draft text, and you can comment on the draft text. So more details definitely is there. And then I see a lot about ability to change, transparency, discussion, ongoing discussions, discussion again, strong ambition. That all is about you really want to see what we are doing, and I think we are really trying hard, as good as we can, to provide that in the different stages of this development process, to engage with you and to really seriously take into account what your concerns are. Although we have to deal with many different of you with many different voices that there are, but we try to put it together and to get an idea of what is necessary and not. And I can also promise you not just more details at the text for the consultation, but also all this, the transparency, the openness, the possibility to change, the ability to listen. We will definitely all have all that. There's a large harmonization one there. Yeah, I mean, a network code always is about harmonization. You only have to hit the sweet spot. Yeah, you should not harmonize too little, and you should not harmonize too much. And it's not just about simple questions harmonizing this or that. It's about the details. It's about exactly which details should be harmonized and which should not be.
I think it's interesting that participation ramped up actually while showing this word cloud. So people reconnected. Thanks a lot. So let's keep it open for one more minute, maybe.
Yeah, being interactive is always helpful, I guess. And just to mention, the words that are shown in a bigger font are the ones that are mostly voted. So the participants of Slido can also vote for the input of the other participants. So the ones that we see bigger are the more popular inputs, let's say.
There was a popular input named simplicity. I would love that I could promise that. However, I'm not so sure. It is a complex matter here.
Yeah, keep in mind, this thing really touches from planning to operations to markets. This is not simple, what we're doing. I think the idea, I think the best workable solution is pick the topics that you're most interested in, but get your hands dirty on that one. It's obvious that probably there are few stakeholders who are interested in all parts, each and every bit of the network code, but you might have a specific interest in, I don't know, pre-qualification. In that sense, it's important that you get your hands dirty on this. Understand what's in the framework guideline, understand what's in the current legislation, regulation, network codes, and then try to come up with a workable solution, of course, to make things more simple, if this is the objective. Of course, sometimes things are a bit too complicated, but to represent all of what we're doing in a simple way, I think that's quite a challenge, I would say. I also see, identify main concerns. This is probably what we are doing. We can promise that. Reasonable time, I assume, for the public consultation, it will be 2 months.
Given that we have an overall time frame of only 12 months, which is the maximum that the Commission has granted us, because it's the maximum that they can basically do according to the regulation. I think 2 months for the public consultation is it is a lot, but it certainly also is necessary.
Something about the reasoning behind the text. As you probably know, each network code has an explanatory document always attached. We cannot promise that it will be fully fledged already for the version 1, which will be consulted publicly. But of course, with the official submission, we'll have a full explanatory document with the reasoning behind the text. That's good practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks a lot. I think we are 3 minutes before closing this workshop. I love to see all the. It took in the beginning. Well, it was for 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. It was a bit one-sided, but then it got through the different interactive stages, and you really took the opportunity to provide your opinion on things, to ask questions. I think it was very fruitful. It was very helpful to get a feel of what is relevant for you, and we are looking forward to continuing interaction with you throughout in these different stages and with these different bodies, including the drafting committee, with all of you throughout the year. Fabio, last words?
No, I can only thank you, of course, for your participation, for your active participation as well. It was a pleasure to moderate this workshop together with Thorsten. And so far we can only say thank you for coming, and we are looking forward to the interaction with you. Next appointment for sure is the public workshop during the public consultation. But feel free, of course, to ask questions. Sultan provided his email in case you have. Sultan, last words from you?
Yes, thank you, Fabio. Just to mention about the slide deck again, I put the link in the chat, so please find it in the Q&A. It is available, the event page, so you will find the slide deck tomorrow there. And about the recording of this workshop, so you will have the recording already in the chat of it as well. After the meeting is done, the recording will be available there. And we will also publish it on the YouTube channel of ENTSO-E, so you can also find it there. And we will update the event page with the link to the recording as well. So all of that.
And we'll probably also publish it on the YouTube channel of the entity then.
Very good.
With this, I think we wish you a nice afternoon.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
everybody. Thank you.